is taken from Psalm 118 in the Septuagint, or 19 in the Hebrew. It is the longest chapter in the Bible, the longest psalm. It has 160 pieces. And it is all, listen, this is something you can do as homework. All the verses, all 160, I forgot the number exactly. All the 160 verses, all of them, each one of them include commandments, words, statutes, judgments, words. This is a praise, a serenade. Does anybody knows what serenades are? What's a serenade? A serenade. When a young man stands by, this is old school, stand under in a very full moon night, stands under the balcony of a beautiful young girl, and he's singing songs to her, hoping that she would listen to him. That's called a serenade. When your father gives a little song to your mother of love, it's called a serenade. This song is a serenade to the commandments of God. This is the longest psalm, the longest chapter in the Bible, and it's smack in the right in the middle of the Bible, and it is every verse, every single verse. You can pick whatever verse you want. It's about the commandments. I might do this exercise with you tomorrow. Okay, let us go into a little video, because I know you started to get interested, and I've heard some questions about the videos. I'm going to show you, this is one of my favorite ones. This is done by the University of New York, by an intensive care physician who's very excited about this subject. His name is Sam Karnian. He's of Iranian origin. He has a British accent because he grew up in England. But this is the testimony of some doctors and professors in his university. Very, very big hotshot people in the University of New York Medical School. I'm going to start by this guy. What's his name? Robert Montgomery. He's the head of the Department of Transplantation in the Grossman School of Medicine. And he's going to tell us about his own story. Listen.
I was climbing in the Andes in a snowstorm at a very high altitude, and I started to get very winded. Then I felt, as I always feel when I have an abnormal rhythm, I felt it coming on, and I sort of braced, and then nothing.
He's talking about his own first heart arrhythmia that actually killed him. He died in this mountain hike. It's going to happen to him 6 more times, and I want to go to the end of the movie where he's actually talking about his experiences. Okay? What happened when he gets out of his body? Listen. I'm going to start with him because this is a very touching one, and it touches me every time he speaks about it.
More real, more intense, more vivid than anything I've experienced here on Earth.
He's talking about his conscious.
Who I am on this earth, Robert Montgomery, is in a way like the earth. And this other consciousness is like the cosmos. And I think that we're not aware of that because it's just too vast to imagine, and that's how it felt.
Listen.
And I think it's drowned out by all the light.
He's touched. You hear this in his tone, he's cracking. You feel it? He's saying in those 7 times I got out of my body, my conscience got expanded. In this life, I'm limited by one thing at a time. I got out of my body and my conscience got so big, it was like the cosmos. And his 7 times of death and getting out of his body, he saw it the same. Everything is drowned in a
light.
What's that light?
Light
What's
of
that
light.
light? Anyone?
Light of light. Light of God.
Yes.
Light of God, Christ.
Christ, who called himself, no, it's Christ, who called himself, I am the light of
The world.
What happened when St. Paul saw him on the way to Damascus?
Christ was bright light.
You know the story?
Yeah.
On his way entering Damascus, and all of a sudden a very bright light, more than the sun, shone around him, and he heard him speaking to him. And some people, I'm going to show you this other one, and I think it's important that we get this perspective, so you understand these are not joking, these are serious stories. It matches what we know perfectly. And let me go into this man, and I want you to listen to this story. This guy.
I had a horrific automobile accident. The whole family was in the car. It was myself, my wife, and our 2 young sons. When the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. All I knew is I had crashed the car. My young 7-year-old was crying hysterically. I couldn't move. I was pinned. I couldn't get to him. And yet that was the brutal reality that no one else was crying. My wife and my youngest son had both passed. They were both killed instantly at the scene. But it was in that darkest moment that something very profound happened. It felt like light came to me. I literally felt like light came and surrounded me. And the light felt tangible, almost comforting. And it felt as if I was rising above the scene of the accident. My wife, who I knew was deceased at the accident, she was there in the light with me. And we began to have this conversation where she was emphatic that I go back. You can't come, you've got to go back. And we were literally having a very intense conversation about the fact that I had a small son, a 7-year-old son in the backseat of that car that was okay. And if I went with her, he would be orphaned. And I literally made a choice. I made a choice to come back into this realm.
You understand what happened? The car crash ended up killing his wife and the little boy because their bodies were completely smashed. There was no way of them coming back. There was no way for her to go back. The only one who can go back is the man. But this is happening while they are hugged by a comforting light. This is most of the Christian people, actually. And then I'm going to show you what happens when I'm going to show you this other woman who's talking about the life review, because they all talk about the life review. And maybe I can show you this one too. This is my favorite
finally stabilized.
Are we going to be able
Here is
to continue?
this doctor who's an emergency room doctor, I think intensive care doctor.
Urgent that follows a very specific narrative.
There are accounts of what we now call near-death experiences from ancient Greece and Rome. And in fact, every culture in which people have looked for histories of near-death experiences, they found accounts of these. It was Raymond Moody, actually a medical student at the time in 1975, who used the term near-death experience for the first time in English. And he had, in medical school, asked his patients who had been close to death what they remembered of the experience. He found about 150 of these cases in his patients during the course of his medical school. And in 1975, he wrote a book called Life After Life, in which he used the term near-death experience and the acronym NDE. And that was the name that stuck, for better or worse.
Based on the scientific and medical advancements of recent years, for referring.
Now he wants them. Okay. Listen to this guy. I think this is funny.
We now call them recalled experiences of death, or REDS for short.
It was my first day as a doctor. I was, I think, justifiably terrified. I had a second-year resident who was supervising me, who promised me that he would
You able to hear him and understand him? Okay.
cover my back and be present throughout the entire 36-hour period. So I went up and introduced myself to this patient, and the patient's eyes rolled up in the back of his head, and he fell back onto the bed lifeless. So I dove on his chest, I started CPR, in and said, will you please talk with the wife? I'll shock the patient if he rearrests. So I went out and talked to her and was not very optimistic in my discussion with her. About 11:30, his lunch showed up. Well, I hadn't had breakfast and I hadn't had lunch, so I went ahead and ate his lunch. Finally, about 1:30 in the afternoon, he finally stabilized, had a return of pulse, and that pulse was stable. The patient had a very rocky course, was in the hospital about a month after this. And on the last day, I walked into his room. He said, Tom, please sit down, shut the door. And I did that, and I said, well, what can I do for you? And he said, I had an experience during this arrest that has been bothering me for a month, and I need your help. He then explained that he had left his body, and he explained everything that I had done. That I was doing CPR, the shocks, and he followed me down the hallway to my discussion with his wife. And he said, you know, I thought you were pretty pessimistic about my options, and you should have been more optimistic, Dr. Altreppi. He said, and if that wasn't bad enough, you ate my lunch. So that all was a insight for me, but then he really said something that got my attention. And he said, and I thought it was unusual that here I was dying in front of you, and you were feeling sorry for yourself because your second-year resident had left you alone and wasn't supervising you. Now, I had never verbalized that embarrassing thought to anyone. But he told me what I thought. And that really got my attention.
This is interesting because almost all of them, without exception, they say the very interesting thing, when we get out of our body, we can read the thoughts of people. Think about it. You cannot speak. Souls don't have voices to speak. How do you communicate? It's much easier than the body. Through the body, you have your brain initiating the talk, goes through your nerves, and goes into the mechanical part of speech, your vocal cords, and tongue. They need none of that. They need none of that. This is a very insightful thing, because think about prayer. You're speaking to God. Who should speak? Your tongue or your heart and thought and soul? Your heart and soul. This is exactly what souls. There's a Russian guy in the other book. A Russian guy, it was very funny. He said, it was so exciting to read the thoughts of the doctors who were resuscitating me. He was excited. And that was very exciting. I could actually see their thoughts. Okay. Now this person might be an example of people who had a life review. Let me just give you that woman. Two of them, actually, two women.
My adventure began in January of 1999. We went to South America with friends of ours for a week of kayaking, of whitewater kayaking.
She's an orthopedic surgeon.
We kayaked for the first week and had a wonderful time. And on what was going to be our last day of whitewater kayaking anyway, we decided to paddle a section of river that's well known for its waterfalls. I went down this drop or this waterfall, and and the front of my boat became pinned or stuck in the rocks and the underwater features. And while I was still upright in my boat, the water then completely submerged me and the boat. And as the time ticked on, I knew that I was in a bit of a predicament. And at that moment, I was immediately overcome by a very, very physical sensation of being held and comforted and reassured that everything was fine. My husband would be fine, my young children would be fine, regardless of whether I lived or died. And I was still me. I still had my same pragmatic, analytical sense about me. And I was experiencing this incredible a sense of not just calm and peace, but this incredible sense of absolute love. I really was sort of amazed. I was thinking, wow, I'm not afraid. I don't feel panic. I feel great. And then I was taken through a life review that was like nothing I personally could have imagined.
One collection of phenomena are changes in your thought processes. Your thoughts seem to be going faster than usual, they're clearer than usual, they're more vivid than usual. You may have a complete review of your entire life, and this is happening again in the context of likely brain damage, or at least severely restricted oxygen to the brain, when you would not expect much of an experience at all, let alone hyperacute senses and rapid, clear thinking.
That's what the man is.
23 years ago,
We're gonna move forward. I don't know why we came back here. We'll just go to this next woman, and she's going to talk more about the life review.
I would relive these heated arguments, feeling in the perspective of the other person who's at the brunt of, without walls, without ceiling, also turning blue. When I was 20 years old, I gave birth to my first child. It was a very traumatic labour, through which I lost a huge amount of blood, and I was required to have a blood transfusion. And within a couple of hours of the blood transfusion starting, I started to have a reaction. The next thing I knew, there was an oxygen mask on my face, and that's when I was just mentally thinking to myself, what's happening? And that's what I noticed that my nails were turning blue, and that was about the point where I thought, oh, I'm dying. Pretty much straight after that, I'm going to say flying. I'm definitely going up.